I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Mike Glenn will be speaking on reclamation resilience in the face of wildfires. Mike Glenn is a vegetation ecologist with Montana DEQ's coal program. This involves working with coal mine operators to reach final bond release and evaluating those operations against the laws and specific permit requirements. Mike has been with the coal program since 2012 and moved into the role of bond release coordinator in 2018. Prior to joining the coal program, Mike was a project manager with the Abandoned Mine Lands program, also with DEQ, after graduating college from Montana State University with a degree in land rehabilitation. Please join me in welcoming Mike. Thank you.
All right. Is this, yep, it's making noise. All right, just double checking. I forgot Dan was going to talk about that, so this next slide is going to cover some of the same things. This conference is kind of new to the coal program. DEQ's recently done a reshuffle, and we're all part of the mining bureau now. We're noticing that coal mining isn't too different from a lot of the hard rock operations that are going on. We run into the same problems and are also working towards the same goals. So I know this is about coal, and a lot of you guys don't work on coal projects, but hopefully some of what we're going to talk about will be able to apply elsewhere. So again, Mike Glenn with the coal program. So our role, we're the regulatory agency. This next slide is going to have a bunch of acronyms. You guys are all very familiar with that. There's a bunch of laws and rules that are in place here. We're tasked with regulating the coal mines, active mines here. I say active, obviously there's the abandoned mine program. There's all sorts of other operations through BLM and Forest Service for non-operating mines. But we're tasked with the active coal mines. So we're funded through OSM. Means we have to follow CFRs, the federal side of things, then get down to MCAs, ARMs. When I try to explain my job to people, they don't understand any of that. So I tell them that I look at plants on coal mines. So, and of course, this is what they think I'm looking at, this underground scene. And off to the right here is Big Sky Mine. This is an example of some of the reclamation in coal mining. So clearly different ideas of what things look like. So today we're talking, this is the extreme events session, talking about project sites and wildfires. Obviously, we all hear those sirens, we hear the news stories. First, it's a matter of, okay, who do I know in that area? Are they safe? Then it's usually, oh crap, this is South Coal Strip. What about all that project work we've been working on for all these years? So we have access to a bunch of different resources for getting that information, obviously, InsoWeb, news stations, apps. This is actually a fire that was going south of Reclamation while I was out doing a bond release inspection one time. So smoke signals are also a good indicator that you need to leave the site and figure out that you have a safe ride home. So active sites give some benefits here. Obviously, not only are these large operations good fire breaks, but they also have big toys, which means that if something does go wrong, it's not a D6 out there, it's a D11 with a reclamation blade cutting fire line. So these guys are pretty effective. What we're seeing here, obviously this is Rosebud's operation at Area B, actually Area A, sorry. But the Westmoreland Resources mine here, South Coal Strip, they've prevented coal strip from burning by being in operation before. And Big Sky, that we're going to talk about next here, has kind of come into a similar situation. So these guys have dealt with fire. I also wasn't sure, being new to this conference, that most of you guys are probably West Divide operators. So if you don't know where Coal Strip is, you go to Billings and you keep going. And you keep going. And it's out here east of Hardin, south of Forsyth. So, and again, our project site is the Big Sky Mine, which you can see marked out here. And I'm sure you guys can see the mine in this photo, right? That's actually Westmoreland up to the north. Big Sky Mine is fully reclaimed at this point. So I don't know if we're going to be able to get this on all the screens, but we've got Area B coming through here. And this is technically a separate permit that comes up this drainage and over here includes this ag field. So Big Sky Mine. So one of the things I want to talk about, again, work for the state, so talking about laws and rules. These things change a lot over time. This was also discussed this morning. There's different bond release requirements than on different areas. So this map isn't perfectly kind of called out and is not showing quite as much contrast as I thought. But so this area right in here, this was actually mined and reclaimed prior to laws going into place. So when we go out to evaluate it for bond release, we have different metrics that apply. The area just to the east of that, or sorry, the north here, this was mined and reclaimed prior to 1989. 1989 is when Montana implemented a phase 4 bond release process, meaning that companies then needed to evaluate also for the hydrologic balance being reestablished post-mining. So when we go out to look at these coal mines and looking at bond release, that's kind of my role at this point. I have to evaluate what rules apply here and then how do we move forward with that. So this area that I initially talked about, that pre-78, the only thing that we really have to go off of, the MCAs state that reclamation shall be diverse, effective, and permanent. And then as we move on, we have more metrics to measure against. So as I said before, we're talking about Big Sky Mine and the extreme events. We're going to talk about the Richard Spring Fire a little bit. If you guys are familiar with this, it started August 8th. And an update from the 9th, so the first day, we're already at 35,000 acres. This burned hot and fast. Again, you can see we're just south of Coal Strip where this started. By August 14th, we're at 171,000 acres. So in a week, it torched a huge amount of ground. Again, you can see Coal Strip up there to the north and the airport, all the way to Brandenburg Road there, 212. So covered a very large area of ground. Also, super intense fire. This is footage from this fire. Clearly, obviously, when it goes that fast, it's going to be a little on the spotty side, which actually probably helped out that area as far as being able to recover. But very high intensity. And in the midst of this, we have our Big Sky Mine, which was up for final bond release, meaning that it's no longer been active, it's fully reclaimed. We're expecting to pass off all responsibility back to ag users. And this is what our site looks like. So I can put this in there because Alex isn't here today. They were checking on, we had some wells in place and seeing how those survived. Obviously the PVC didn't go, but everything else did. You can see the trees in the background there. They're all torched, all the reclamation in between also gone. So again, kind of keying in on the bond release process here and what was going on. August 2nd, these guys applied for bond release. August 8th, their project site completely burned to a crisp. I got calls immediately trying to figure out what the hell are we going to do? How do we evaluate this? With bond release packages, Montana law requires 10-year responsibility period for coal projects anyways. And these guys need to sample any 2 years after year 6 to evaluate the reclamation. They're measuring cover, production, woody plant density, those kind of things. So they've collected all this data, 2018, 2019, waiting until the bond release time would actually, the 10-year clock would expire. So we have this data that demonstrates that this area meets all the reclamation requirements we would ever ask of it. And now when we go out to do a ground evaluation, it's gone. Typical DEQ fashion. I'm sure Dickie appreciates this one. We identified deficiencies in the application, and which meant we had a little bit more time to think about how to move forward here. So Kind of jumping ahead, working through those deficiencies, we get to the spring of '22, and we're going to conduct the bond release inspection June 8th. Turns out 10 months to the day from the start of the fire. So interesting coincidence, was completely unplanned. And you guys saw that last photo, you know, this is what it looked like. We're not really 100% sure what we're going to walk into, and this is what we get, which was pretty amazing. You can see we've got silver sage coming back like it wasn't impacted. A little note for those of you that do pay a ton of attention to plants, obviously there's a lot of smooth brome in here. Again, with those different requirements for bond release, there are different allowances for veg communities. So smooth brome is part of this. We also have western wheat. Again, a number of forbs. You know, this June inspection, we were able to catch a lot of the cool season species that were growing, and some of the warm seasons are starting to come on. So, again, I kind of talked about this stuff a little bit before. The reason I'm bringing this up is I think at some point what might be interesting is, and I know Hard Rock folks, and particularly maybe John, do not want to hear me say this, but some of these rules might actually be beneficial in other situations also. And what I'm getting at is we have these requirements in the lawn rule that say that we're going to clean these sites up to a certain standard. And these were written 50 years ago, 1978. So these laws have been on the books, and now we're at a situation where maybe we could test this out. So just wanted to kind of have these in here. The other benefit to this site is these guys used a reference community. So actually I think that's coming up. So we'll just let this part go next. This footage from Mark Odeberg, his second drone flight. So again, this is just some of the reclamation out there. And clearly cows are happy. What these sites generally go back to are ag users. This was in ag production when the operation was going, and so we're trying to get them back to this. This meets their post-mining land use. So anytime we can have cows in there is a good thing. They do wonders for reclamation. I know they're terrible on fences, but they have other benefits here. So go ahead and, so we're talking June 8th, final bond release inspection, the formal bond release inspection. We invite landowners to come out. These guys have been operating on this land and adjacent to it for 40 years as well. Their families have been here a lot longer. So we bring them out and ask them, what do they think? You know, is this area meeting what they're asking for? Again, you can see we've got western wheatgrass, some silver sage here. So DEQ granted final bond release. This met all the metrics we could ask it to, demonstrated reclamation success even after this wildfire. So we've now got kind of an interesting situation. We have this area that's been monitored for 40 years. People have been out there. The veg requirements, that stuff's been sampled at least for probably 30. So we've got this area fully reclaimed, multiple levels of bond release or multiple levels of laws. Now we have this devastating impact from the wildfire, and we have what appears to be successful recovery. Sorry, we're getting a little feedback in there. So we also have, as I said, a ton of data. We've been collecting this, we've been sampling it. When I say we, this is done by consultants. Cedar Creek primarily did this work. They're out of Colorado. And again, they implemented a reference community. So we've been moving companies to standards because they're a little bit easier to keep track of, and it costs less when it comes to sampling efforts. These guys stuck with a reference community. So that means that they're sampling this area next to the coal mine and the area on the coal mine, and they're going to do a comparison between the two. The standard that they meet is the 90% of the mean of what they're aiming for in the other one. So, and both of these data sets have now been impacted by the same devastating wildfire. So we've got, just for an example, this is the 2018 sampling effort for Big Sky. Here's some of their sampling locations. Again, you guys could, this area is all that burned. Those photos that we were looking at, they encompassed this big area here in yellow. And this kind of rocky outcrop is up here that you guys were able to see in a couple of the photos. So here are reference community areas that have been sampled. So again, we have a ton of data points. These are sampled based on soil types. The rangeland health assessment is a tool that we use internally to kind of measure against. So we compare the communities across the similar soil types. But this is just 1 year's worth of data, and we have 30 or 40. So we have all of this information. Now, the real question is okay, it looks good. Maybe we could prove it. If we did prove it, we could potentially say that the laws that are in place are actually effective at meeting reclamation. We have this area that was completely destroyed by fire. We have these standards saying, hey, this is healthy. Now it gets torched. Now we can say, hey, it actually works. It self-recovers. It stabilizes itself back out. So then my question would be, okay, does this go to another level? I know nobody wants to hear all this sampling aspect, and when you're running a project, these are all costs. Obviously, they're incurred over time. Maybe there's ways that this could be pared down, but if we were to go out and evaluate these sites again this year, next year, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we have this huge sampling set to compare against. We can say this area either does or doesn't still meet these metrics. It's recovering in the same way that the reference community is recovering. So these targets of 90% of the standard, 90% of the time for cover production, woody plant density. Could you go to a site in the Pioneer Mountains that you've been working on and find a similar community adjacent to it, measure it against that, come in after reclamation, do a one-time deal and say, okay, here's this reference community, here's my project site, we're gonna compare these two, it's meeting that 90% of the time, maybe we can walk away. Maybe we don't need to come back in and do extended efforts down the road. So it's kind of what I was thinking as far as taking this beyond coal mining. Hopefully some of this hits home with you guys. Obviously, we're going to deal with fire in all of our sites, all of our project areas. So I was thinking I'd ask Dan for some money while he's in front of a big room of people, but I know he doesn't want to deal with that. Maybe I'll talk to Sonia about it. So I think we should get back in here and sample this area again. That way we can actually demonstrate a little bit more verification or validation that these rules that we have are effective. So, any questions at all? Okay.
I was just curious, is this all private land or what's kind of the bundle of sticks?
Just real quick, the question is
Yes.
this all private land or what's the status of the land in this area?
So Big Sky, let me cycle back through here. Oh, this won't work. So these areas have a lot of the coal mines, again, Leasing Act, a lot of this was leased coal. So generally these areas that were mined would have been bought by the coal company with buyback rights then for the property owners that had previously held it. A lot of times at $1 an acre, very cheap. And they have first buyback rights. So these are going to be going back to those same cattle ranchers that owned it prior to, unless they've sold that interest during mining. So we're in discussions with those operators the whole time that these operations are going on. They're involved at bond release at multiple levels. This area has had 11 applications on it. So landowners have had 11 different opportunities at release to come out and chat with us and let us know how it's going. So I hope that answers some of the questions.
We also had some federal lands there. I was the
Yep.
chief engineer years ago.
Okay,
Developed that bluff section concept.
very cool. And that's something we've had to fight with some of our federal counterparts with over the years. being able to leave some of those steep slopes in and existing topography. So,
Another question back here, one sec.
Yeah, I'm a GIS guy.
Hold on just a second.
Test. Okay. I'm a GIS guy, and I'm just curious to determine the 90% coverage and the 90% production. Do you guys just do boots on the ground sampling, or institute any sort of remote sensing or anything like that to do more long term?
at the moment, all we've been doing are boots on the ground. Again, this stuff is kind of the way our operation or the state regulatory program is set up. Is the operators will pay a consultant to collect, the data that's required for bond release. Then we'll come out and, first we'll evaluate it in the office, and then we'll come out and ground truth. We are, as I said, we have a drone fleet operating now as part of the Mining Bureau, and some of our staff are getting up to speed on that. So we may be using drones in the future to kind of fast track some of this. When I started, I know I did some of the initial evaluations out here on foot, and did 400 acres before noon and another 400 after, and now we've got a side-by-side, so that speeds things up a little bit. But as far as the sampling metrics that we have in place, we would generally do that still boots on the ground, but there's potential to move that to a drone. So,
Any other questions for Mike?
You said they were under the older bonding requirements. What differences would you see if they had been under the new? What are the major differences?
So I guess I wasn't quite as clear as what I was hoping. This area here was the oldest mining area. This area here was a little bit newer. This area a little bit newer after that. As you can see in this photo, we've still got facilities here. That was reclaimed in 2012. So that is the newest standards. So what I was meaning before is we have all these different iterations of reclamation requirements that have changed throughout time. So we are still seeing success on the newest standards as well. And the vegetation really didn't change a whole lot over that time frame. The communities did though. So originally you could use up to 49, anything less than 50% of your seed mix could be introduced species. Now we're completely to native only. So the big difference there would just be that those plant communities have shifted a little bit to more sustainable native systems. So,
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Mike.
guys. Maybe we should turn this on.